My name is Ken Stanley. I work for the Centre for Effective Services, and together with my colleague Dervla Lane, we'll be facilitating this session. So we're going to talk a bit about collaboration. And look, I suppose, let's face it, anything that's kind of note that happens both within work or outside of work, really doesn't happen without some sort of collaboration. However, how often do we take time to really reflect on collaboration itself? Do we do it well? Do we set ourselves up to be able to collaborate effectively? Or is it something that happens really by chance or by accident?
My name's Dervla Lane and I'm a project specialist and I work in the Belfast office of CES. But just a wee bit about our organisation. So we're a not-for-profit all-island organisation and we were set up about 15 years ago. At the time, Atlantic Philanthropies was investing money in early intervention and prevention services, north and south. And there was a feeling at the time that these services would benefit from support to become more evidence informed. So CES was set up as an intermediary organisation to sit, I suppose, as a bridge between service providers and public policymakers and, I suppose, the research academic community, and try and support the translation and use of evidence to improve how policy and practice is done. And I suppose we work in key areas now across health, education, justice, children and young people. And we work with government departments, service providers. And I suppose our vision is to improve outcomes for people living in our communities. And we do this by seeking to become a trusted partner in the design, development, implementation and evaluation of public policies and services. So what does collaboration mean? So I suppose Ken and I, when we were preparing for this session, were just reflecting on the title. So it's all in, collaborating with purpose. And we, I suppose, shared different reflections on what that meant for us. So I'm going to invite Ken to go first.
So look, all in, a bit of a catchy title maybe, but look, what does all in mean to me? I suppose, look, if you think about collaboration, you really get out of it what you put into it. So to me, all in is, you give it your all, you give it your best shot, because by doing that, you really get the best chance to be able to get the most from it. The other thing about all in to me is a bit about everybody or all of us collaborating, and collectively as a group. The more the group puts in collectively, the more they will get from it. So that was my thoughts on all in. Dervla.
Yep, and I suppose for me, the all-in piece really kind of brought to mind that inclusivity and I suppose involving all stakeholders. And then the purpose piece, I suppose, Ken and I will talk about purpose quite a bit throughout this session, and we mean kind of working towards a shared purpose, but it also, I suppose, brings to mind for me that idea of kind of meaningful collaboration. So it's not tokenistic, that it's done in a very purposeful way, and I suppose that inclusivity. So I suppose just a few words of wisdom from others to kind of help set the tone for the session. So if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. And then coming together, so this is from Henry Ford, coming together is a beginning, staying together is progress, and working together is success. And I suppose reflecting on these quotes, it really kind of brings that sense of collaboration as being a process, it's a journey, but also that it really requires consistent and sustained effort and time to build those relationships that support collaboration. So what makes for effective collaboration? So some of the hallmarks of good collaboration that we see through our work in CES, creating a shared understanding, and that's really central, I suppose. It comes back to that kind of common purpose, but also just a common understanding among partners and collaborators about what they want to achieve and how they're going to get there. We've got mutual planning and management, and again, that kind of comes down to effective communication and knowing exactly where you're going and what you want to do and achieve. Conscious alignment of goals, strategies, agendas. We talked about sharing of resources and activities. And I suppose that kind of can involve realigning personal or individual goals to those shared goals. And shared goals need to kind of rely on being kind of clear, agreed, understood by everyone. Equitable commitment of investment and capacities. And where that's not possible, and you may find that it isn't always possible, sometimes smaller organisations are collaborating with larger organisations with much greater capacity, then it comes back to that clear and effective communication so that everyone is on the same page, expectations are managed, and relationships are kept. And then sharing risks, liabilities, and benefits. And again, just kind of managing those risks, anticipating them and putting plans in place. And I suppose collaboration being a collection of two or more individuals working together. And I think across all of these, again, it comes back to what you've shared in your thoughts. Shared, equitable, mutual togetherness, that's really coming quite clear. So why do we collaborate? So there are a range of reasons that you might collaborate with one another. You might need access to different skills, knowledge or expertise that your organisation doesn't have access to. You might be struggling in isolation with a complex problem, holistic interventions for issues that go across multiple areas. The need to create a stronger voice, so you might want to build a coalition to challenge, and you might want to broaden access to funding or service users, and again we can see that in our work as well. And I suppose central to all of this is the idea and the importance of having kind of shared goals or values that you're working towards. So these are just a range of the benefits, and we're just building on that. Benefits, opportunities and incentives for collaboration. And I suppose the one that stuck out for me, and I just wanted to kind of bring some attention to it, is the broader perspectives piece, because I suppose when Ken and I were reflecting and preparing for this session, I suppose we both had in our mind that idea of collaboration between organisations and groups. But I suppose in our work in CES, we're sort of trying to think a wee bit more about how we bring the citizen voice in and how we can kind of bring in that lived experience and do that in a meaningful and inclusive way. So it's just something to bear in mind. The process and I suppose the frameworks and tools that Ken and I will share, we've used them before with groups to support kind of collaboration at a service level. But I do think there is, adaptability there if you're thinking about trying to plan for some meaningful engagement with service users. And Ken, you had a reflection that you wanted to share.
I want to share a reflection of something that I worked on, in the past couple of years, where I saw collaboration in action and where I saw that it really kind of worked well. It was with my work with the HSE, during COVID. As you know, initially when COVID hit, community testing centres popped up all around the country, and they were popped up at a rapid rate and staffed by staff who were redeployed from community services. Now, as the first wave of COVID thankfully started to dissipate, it became necessary to plan for what was going to come further down along the line. We knew there would be bigger, maybe more impactful waves. We knew that the testing was going to become much more important in terms of controlling the disease. We weren't all going to be, well, that was the intention at the time, that we weren't all going to be told to stay at home for weeks and weeks upon end. But we needed to build a service that had a lot more capacity, that was a lot more efficient, and that was a lot more effective. So what we did just after that first wave was we brought the people together, virtually of course, as it was at the time, those that had lived the service over the previous number of weeks and months, to really tap in and try to harness their knowledge, their experience. Everything had been set up so quickly and at such pace that we really had to help them to step back, listen to each other, understand what worked in the different areas and really capture and, as I said, try to harness the knowledge and information and insights that they had. What that all did was helped us to develop and stand up a much improved service that thankfully was able to deliver much greater capacity, and that one that worked a lot more efficiently and effectively than it did in the first phase. I think one thing that was really important around it was we were able to anchor everybody around a common goal, which was to get that service ready. So all of those things together, but I think really, I suppose if I reflect back on it, it was that commitment to collaboration and the commitment to want to do something and to do right was something that we really saw. So that's just a good example. And as I said, look, we'll talk about some of the practices and processes that we help design around some of that as we go through today.
So this is just another practice example that we wanted to draw attention to, and this is from the Reaching Out Supporting Families programme. So this was a programme that the National Lottery invested in Northern Ireland. So they invested 25 million in 36 family support projects over a 5-year period, and they commissioned CES to work as a kind of, again, that in that intermediary role to kind of support projects to implement well and also then to evaluate their projects. And then alongside that, we also developed a learning calendar that projects attended regularly and had networking events and things like that. And as part of our role, we wanted to kind of capture the learning from the programme. So we wanted to kind of find out what was working well. There was a wealth of knowledge throughout those 36 projects. They'd been working with families over a 5-year period. They knew what worked, and we wanted to try and capture that and share the learning. So this is from one of the learning papers that we developed from that, which was really around partnership. And just to draw some of the attention to some of the kind of benefits that came out of that. And these were organisations that were mandated as part of the funding stream to work with at least one other partner. So it was very much a kind of focus, and the breadth and kind of level of partnership that the organisations had varied from partners on paper, which came out in terms of, trying to access the funding, but you had some real strong collaboration going on within the sector, and also with voluntary and community sector organisations and statutory. And I suppose the benefits for families that came out of that were a greater awareness of support and an access to a more holistic network of support. So organisations were working together, they were referring families in, but they were also communicating with one another about how best they could support those families collectively and who was best placed to do what. And that brings us on to that cross-agency advocacy. So again, they sort of helped plug some of those gaps between services. There was a more seamless move between services and tiers. And also there was improved advocacy. So organisations were advocating to other organisations to help improve services or make them more accessible for their families. And organisations also benefited from that. So there were peer support, peer learning. And also, again, we talked about this before, but that sharing of resources and also greater credibility for the organisations involved. And I suppose just in terms of collaboration, we've heard quite a bit so far about the benefits, the opportunities and the incentives. But it is just to highlight that sometimes collaboration isn't the answer, and sometimes it isn't always appropriate, whether that's for your organisation or for the area that you're looking at. So we would just kind of caution about kind of weighing up the benefits, costs and risks for collaborating. So we've heard quite a bit about the benefits, but some of the costs might be in terms of those resources that we talked about. We know everyone's stretched at the moment, so that sharing of resources can, I suppose, be a cost to the organisation. It may also, we talked about kind of realigning personal kind of agendas to those shared goals. So you may end up kind of being swayed towards something that maybe isn't aligned with what your kind of organisation strategy is taking you on. And then in terms of risks, I suppose there could be a range of risks that might come from collaborating. You might have the risk of kind of reputational damage if you're associated with certain organisations. And there are a range of other things that could become a risk. So the breakdown in communication could happen, for example. So there's just a range of things that we have to weigh up when we're considering whether to collaborate and who to collaborate with.
Derva took us through a lot about understanding around what collaboration, what it looks like. But practically, let's say we've decided now we're going to go all in. We're going to go all in and we're going to make collaboration work. So how do we actually get there? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take you through a process that we've employed with in a number of different settings, both with groups that maybe were newly forming, but also groups that maybe had lost their way a little bit and needed to get a little bit back on track. So it's quite a simple process that I think any group can actually do without too much difficulty. We'll give you some practical tips as to how to maybe kind of make that happen. But 3-step process and then bring it together. It's really, really important, I suppose, in the first instance that a group understands and knows its purpose. I know it sounds like I'm stating the absolute obvious, but really and truly, if a group doesn't understand what it is they're there for and what it is they're trying to achieve, well, how can you expect them to achieve it? You're back to that happening by chance and happening by some chance as opposed to, or by magic, as opposed to it happening with the magic, so to speak. So the first step of the process is about getting the group together and getting them and asking them to design their mission statement or their purpose statement. I know that sounds maybe a little bit lofty and maybe can be a little bit wordy, but look, a quick 1 or 2 sentences, 12 to 15 words, that really kind of focuses in people in terms of defining what it is their purpose is, goes an awful long way in terms of helping them understand what it is. But actually, in doing that, you've kind of tricked them into collaborating in the first instance, right? Because actually what you have to do when you're trying to do that and create that purpose statement is step back. Step back from what's important to you or what's important to me, and instead look at, well, what it is that's important for the group. People need to listen, they need to align, they need to hear what others are saying. And in doing all of those things, you start to hit on some of that theoretical stuff that we heard about earlier, and start seeing, some of these things start to come to the fore. So it really is kind of, I suppose, the art of bringing them together, or the act of bringing them together, sets them on the way towards collaborating. Now, groups can do this as a whole group together, or maybe you break the group up into smaller groups and they work on it and then bring them together to refine. And again, that can be a really simple way of getting people to listen maybe more to each other, and to really get that clarity of understanding as to what they're about. Questions, that you might want to ask the group to consider, like, fast forward 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, whatever. What do we want to have achieved? Also, I think it's also good to say, well, what do others expect of us? What does X think we need to achieve? Let's put ourselves in X's shoes. What do they want us to do? That can really help, And as I said, the act of bringing them together to kind of get discussion going and working together is a really good thing. We reckon this can be done in about 30 to 60 minutes without too much difficulty. And again, that clarity of purpose, zone in, this doesn't need to go on for weeks on end, hopefully. On step 2 is understanding the contextual factors. The context shapes everything that we do. And the context for any group is going to be unique to that group and really different to every group. So in step 2, we recommend that the group take time to understand what is the context they are dealing with. What are the factors that are going to impact the group and their ability to be able to achieve the objectives that we've talked about, or that you've set out in your purpose statement. So thinking like, obviously the political priorities, will really impact, can impact the amount of funding we have available to the group. It can impact it can add an impetus or an urgency towards getting things done. It may bring opportunities to lift barriers, or, to remove roadblocks. But on the other hand, it might mean you've got a real uphill battle. But being aware of it, understanding that, talking about that as a group really helps that clarity of thought. The C&V sector are facing increasing standards and increasing regulation. That's a real burden potentially on everybody. How does that impact how the group will need to function and operate? Do you need a different set of skills? Do you need more time? Does it mean you've got a lost cause on your hand? Do you have a real uphill battle? Again, getting the perspectives of the team, gathering that insight, will not only inform the workings of the group, but actually gets them on the road to true collaboration. Because again, the perspectives of one party to the group may be different to that to the others. And again, it's about getting to that mutual alignment, mutual understanding, mutual objectives that we want to get to. Once you've understood and spelt out the contextual factors, or identified contextual factors, the group really needs to do a little bit of work in terms of understanding them, teasing them out a little bit more. That may be in terms of categorizing them. Is it an enabler? Is it a barrier? Maybe it's even both in some cases. What's the most impactful? What's the most urgent? Which ones are the most important? What can you control? What's uncontrollable? And how much effort is it going to take? Because again, maybe some of the things that might be difficult to overcome, the effort to actually overcome them may not be all that big when you actually sit down and kind of tease it out and understand it. Again, you're going back to getting everybody working together and understanding things from different perspectives. Because the perspective that I might have on a factor or a problem may be completely different to somebody else, because they may bring a different set of experiences or insights that might mean that it's a lot easier than my experience has been previously. Is it an issue? Is it an opportunity? Is it something that may materialize as a risk? Again, categorizing them and understanding them. Again, as I said, you're collaborating in true form as well. So not only are you getting a real understanding of what you're trying to do, but you're, as I said, almost tricking the group into actively collaborating as you go along. How does the group work? How will they meet? Will they meet in person? Will they meet online? Do they meet as a whole group? How often do they meet? Is it okay for them to meet separately as little small groups and then come back together? How do you report progress? Is it really structured progress reports? Or is it something that's a little bit more loose that maybe works actually just as effectively? How do people behave at meetings? Is it a safe place to discuss? Can people discuss openly what's happening? Do people leave their own agendas at the door and actually work within the group? What prevents them from doing that? What allows them to be able to do that? Are people motivated? Are they there because someone told them to be there, or because they really believe in the purpose that the group is trying to achieve? Teasing this out is a little bit more difficult, perhaps, or can be a bit more challenging than some of the contextual stuff. We heard you all interact, and I don't think any group had any problem with identifying loads of contextual factors. However, work practices and how we behave is maybe a little bit more personal and might be a little bit more difficult to confront. Couple of things that we ask groups to think about and do. Maybe groups that have worked together before can start asking each other, well, what do we need to stop doing? What do we need to do more of? What do we need to start doing? Groups that maybe did not work together before, should be informed by what they have done before and what they've seen work. Those groups that they saw work well together, those groups that they saw were not such great experiences. This can be difficult to actually tease out in the open, perhaps, particularly for groups that don't know each other. But this is where maybe we can use online tools. That simple Mentimeter. Nobody knows who put in what word. We will we haven't been able to track down the person that said hi, but we will be able. But that sort of a kind of anonymous, tool, or there's many other tools similar to that, can be used to collect information, in more anonymous or maybe more that actually kind of disassociates the comments that are being made from an individual, and people may feel a lot more comfortable with sharing in that way. But that shouldn't mean that just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean it shouldn't be discussed and gotten and understood, because it really does affect how the group actually works and how effective they will be able to collaborate together. So having spent time understanding the purpose, really defining what the purpose of the group is, understanding and analysing the contextual factors and how they influence it, and actually detailing and understanding how the group collaborates and how they organise themselves. How do you bring it all together? Well, what we recommend as the final step in the process is to bring it together into a set of what we call guiding principles. Does what they say in the tin. It guides the group as to how they will act and how they will function. But also hand in hand, there's no point in having guiding principles without having commitments as to what the group will do collectively as a group, or individuals, what the individuals will do in the group. So we recommend, nothing, you don't need, 53 principles. Nobody can stick to that, and we certainly can't give 53 commitments to anything. Keep it simple, 5 or 6. Again, it's about focusing. It's about distilling away what's down to what's important, not what I think is important or what you think is important, but what's important to the group, and really understanding that. So just some kind of principles, examples, maybe a simple thing like, we'll harness, or every decision we'll take will be anchored back to the service user. So we will put and leave aside our own agendas, and the decisions and the path forward that the group will take will always be anchored back to what is best for the service user. Commitments around that might be something like, well, we'll always make sure that we get our meeting agendas out 3 days before, and we'll have meeting summaries out quickly afterwards. That means people know, and they know what they need to do. Or there'll be timely follow-up on actions. One I like here is, we'll never pass the blame to any individual, because the group work together and collaborate together. So with these guiding principles and commitments, what you've got is almost like a mini rule book, or a blueprint for how the group will organise themselves, how they will operate. And it's really good then to anchor everybody back to that. So by going through this process, you've taken it away from you or I, and you've made it all about the group. I use this whole idea of guiding principles and commitments and a program of work that I worked on over a period of 5 years. During that 5 years, we had a lot of change in staff and people who were involved, but we also had a lot of change in terms of who became, who was most impacted at different stages of the program. So every time we met, we actually started out with just a quick reminder here. So it's really just for the new people in the room, but actually the real person that we wanted to remind was the person who we knew might have been developing something of their own agenda, taking it away from the group and what they're doing and anchoring it back to the collaboration. A principle or a commitment that we gave was we would call each other out if people didn't live the principles. Actually worked quite well, and it became kind of a safe way of being able to kind of anchor back to the rule book or the rule sets. So that's our thoughts about how kind of to set yourself up for collaboration. The 3 steps: identify your purpose, understand your context, review how the group will work, bring that together in terms of a set of guiding principles and a set of commitments for the group to operate, and then follow through and use that.
So sustaining collaboration. So I suppose CES are often brought in when groups are beginning to form collaborations, or sometimes we can be brought in when groups have been formed and are maybe falling over. And so drawing on our experience, we've just identified a couple of examples here of reasons why collaborations may fail to deliver or may fall apart. And I suppose I don't want to labour this too much, but I do just want to draw attention to a few of these and sort of give a bit of an explanation or example. So we talked about low level of commitment and buy-in, and I was having some conversations around the room with folks about that idea of shared goals and shared commitment being really important. The other piece here that came up was power imbalance, so that idea that some organisations may hold more power, they may be the funder, they may hold the funding, so that kind of challenge of bringing them on board and getting them involved. The other piece is lack of leadership and planning, and I suppose the importance of leadership being about kind of instilling a culture of learning and collaboration, and I suppose kind of reflecting on making mistakes, learning from those mistakes, and enabling, giving people that kind of permission to take risks. And linked to that, I suppose, is monitoring and evaluation, and the importance of trying to build that in from the beginning. So often in our work, we're trying to encourage people from the very early stages of implementation. You need to be thinking about how you're going to monitor and evaluate so that you know that your collaboration is on track and for success. So that's really important, but it can be challenging because quite often work in the C&V sector is very much contingent on funding, and we know we've heard that quite a bit today in terms of short-term funding cycles and the impact that has on work. So sometimes the term evaluation, I think, can kind of create a bit of uncertainty, I suppose. So it's just about how you communicate that. I talked earlier about the Reaching Out Supporting Families programme, and we use the term capturing the learning because it resonated with people more, and I suppose they were more willing to kind of share, their reflections and their experiences. Limited time for relationship building, and again, funding impacts that as well. Staffing, retention is a huge issue, and if the collaboration is constantly subject to change in personnel, it can be really hard to sustain those relationships. The impacts of poor collaboration, not surprisingly, a lot of these are just the opposites of what makes for effective collaboration, and some of this has come up in our discussions today. But I suppose to bring us back to Ken's process of taking you through where you think about that kind of shared goal, you develop that shared vision, and also you set yourself up for success by developing those commitments and the principles that are going to guide the collaboration. So putting a bit of a structure on it can really help, and bringing the group back can, just help remind people why they're there, what the common goal is, and how you've agreed to work towards that together. We just wanted to share, I suppose, some things that we thought might be able to be used at different parts of the process that Ken talked about, or just in general as you go through collaboration that might help just at different points. So the first one, we see this quite often, and there are different ways of doing a stakeholder analysis matrix, so you can have different things going down the side and across. But it's really just, to help you think about who you're going to collaborate with, and thinking about that kind of continuum of collaboration, who you might kind of involve as key players, who you might kind of build awareness for the collaboration, who might be impacted, and also who you might want to keep informed. So those are just, I suppose, that's a kind of brief tool that you can use to help identify who might be involved in your collaboration. And then kind of building on that further, you might want to then think about, okay, here are all of our kind of stakeholders. Who do we, how much of an impact will they have on the collaboration? How much influence do they have? What are going to be their expectations from the collaboration? Can we meet all of those? And also, how might they contribute to it? How might they hinder it? And I suppose we talked earlier about kind of risk analysis and kind of planning for and putting in place mitigating action. So how might you then engage this stakeholder to bring them on board with your collaboration or whatever the project is that collaboration is putting in place? And then theory of change or logic modelling. So this is something that CES kind of uses quite a bit in its work, and I'm sure some of you in the room have been familiar with this or gone through this process. But I suppose the theory of change really just sets out how your intervention, in this case your collaboration or your project, how you expect it to work. So if these are the outcomes that you want to achieve, how are you going to do that? And this can be a really useful tool to help build that shared kind of vision for what the work is going to look like. So it can help kind of create a common language and a shared understanding among the different stakeholders. So it can be a really useful tool when you're kind of planning at that initial planning stage for your collaboration. But also, one of the benefits of this is that when you go through the process of designing your logic model, you start with your situation analysis, which is about what are the kind of opportunities, needs, what's the current situation. And then rather than kind of going through what output or what inputs, resources do we have available to us, you move from your situation analysis to your outcomes. So it really helps you to think kind of more ambitiously about what you want to achieve, and it's not limited to the resources that you have. So this might be something that if you're planning a project within your organisation and you engage in a logic modelling process, you might start with your situation analysis, move to your outcomes, and as you work your way back, you may find actually there are some activities or outputs or inputs and resources that you as an organisation don't have access to, and it might prompt you then to think about who you might collaborate with so that you can achieve that kind of ambitious goal without being limited to kind of the skill set or resources that you have within your own organisation.
Another tool that we use quite frequently is what we call the RACI matrix. So RACI is really responsibility, accountability, consulting and informed. And it's just a structured way of mapping out who does what and who is responsible for what. Accountable is the single person who is ultimately accountable. It's their head on the block for getting whatever it is done. There should really only be one accountable person or one accountable party, not multiple accountable parties, because you start to dilute it and you kind of get distracted by, well, is that yours, is that mine? No, one accountable party. Responsible is the person who actually does the legwork, who does and who owns it, and who is responsible for making sure that that piece of work is coordinated and completed and done. Along the way, certain tasks will need others to be consulted with or need to be informed of. So this can really help, as I said, bring structure and clarity to what needs to be done, but also help you in terms of managing those situations whereby maybe people are trying to get involved in stuff that's maybe outside of their sphere, or maybe the other way, they're reluctant to get involved in things. No. Remember when we signed up and did our RACI? Actually, you were the responsible person here. Yes, we can revisit it, but you've got something again. It's about having something objective, having structure, having a bit of organisation, and you don't want. I think a lot of people don't like too much structure, but a bit of structure definitely really helps, and I think taking that time really does help. Other simple tools, this ain't rocket science here, but like having things like an actions log, so you can really record who is responsible for something. What is the action? Again, providing clarity, providing coherence, ensuring people understand what it is that needs to be done and by when. Again, can be used to hold people to account. So again, it's not Ken Stanley beating you over the head to get something done. It's the old action log. The action log tells me, Dervla, you're behind on, or tells myself that I'm behind on, more likely. The other thing, decisions log. again, another thing that brings structure, and particularly with regard to longer term projects, or with regard to groups that maybe meet more on an ad hoc basis and people dip in and dip out of. This again is a real structured way. No, we're not reopening that. Remember we talked about this, and this was our decision. You know, again, anchoring it back. Again, it just brings that structure, brings a little bit of organisation, and you can use it, you know, to affect, you know, closing down things or getting things done or reminding people of different things. So look, this is just an example, or these are just a few examples of some tools that we find to be useful. I did mention the blog that we will create an issue through Susie and the iCommunity group. We will provide a number of other tools and structures. We don't want to bombard you. We're not saying, and we're definitely not recommending that you do use every one of them. You know, sometimes less is more. You know, be appropriate to what it is that your group, that you're trying to achieve. And remember, a group and a collaboration isn't just with people outside of your organisation, and it isn't just with, you know, other vested interest groups or people that you have to work with. It could be internal. It could help how you know, operate your own organisation and how you collaborate as a team and as a collective within your organisation.